Welcome to this guide to retrieval mining in ETH Echoes, and specifically retrieval mining in NullSec. So we'll talk about how to stay safe and how to maximize your profits when mining with your retriever in NullSec. Let's get started. First, let's start with the fitting of our retriever. And before I speak about any of the modules specifically, there's two goals that we have. The first goal is to survive any single attacker. No matter what the ship that comes into our belt and tries to kill us, we should be able to get away to safety. And goal number two, to also have a viable option when more than one attacker come into our system. Let's get started here. High slots. For high slots, we will always choose strip miners, in our case MK7 strip miners, which are the best available right now. As soon as faction strip miners become available, that's obviously much better. Mid slots. I have two small drones here in my mid slots. However, with the latest patch, drones have become much more of a liability than they're actually useful. So if you're by yourself in the belt, I would probably not recommend to even take any drones anymore at all, because you cannot actually make use of your cloaking device when your drones are out. So instead of being just a one button press to cloak, you actually have to recall your drones if you have them out, which makes them less useful, and just one additional step where you can just mess up and by accident not have them recalled. So I would not have those drones out anymore. Usually they're just meant to be scary and deter an attacker to actually target you and try to blow you out of the sky. But now it's really just, a little less useful. Now, if you're in a group with multiple miners, ideally already in voice comms, then having those drones out, you can still target any attacker, and fairly easily with just a lot of drones. If you have like 5 to 10 people and everybody has their drones out, you can actually deal quite a bit of damage to attackers. So that's when they actually become useful. But if you're just by yourself, all you're doing is really getting an aggression timer when you're attacking somebody with the drones. So I wouldn't recommend it anymore. And for that reason, I'll probably still keep them in here, but not use them in the belt. And the other mid slot would be 2 energy neutralizers. And you can even fit a large energy neutralizer because we have a lot of power grid left, but medium will do as well. And the reason for this is basically your last line of defense. If you completely screwed up and everything failed, then you still have those energy neutralizers. And if there's too many warp disruption points on you, you can neutralize the capacitor of one of your attackers, and without capacitor they cannot warp disrupt you anymore, and hopefully, maybe, possibly, you can get away. As you can see, usually we don't want to get to that point, and I'll explain all the other strategies that come before that. Okay, energy neutralizers. Now, the most important part, and probably the one point to take away from this video, is how to fit your low slots. And I've seen a lot of discussions, I've seen a lot of videos, mostly done by people who actually, most of the time, either mine in high sec or talk about mining in low sec or null sec, but actually are not people that mine a lot, but rather just, people that do a lot of PvE and PvP, and they really just give very incorrect, bad recommendations, because there's really only one correct fitting for a retriever if you want to survive in null sec. The first component of our strategy to get away from any single opponent is to fit 2 Aura warp core stabilizers. Not 1, but 2. The reason is as follows. The retriever has a roll bonus of 1 warp core stabilization. So you always have +1. And then each of those Aura warp core stabilizers gives you an additional 2 warp core stabilization. Now, the wording here is very bad, but it basically means that with this fitting here, you always have +5 warp core stabilization at any given point. For most attackers, or for a few attackers, that's already enough, because they might only have 2 faction warp disruptors fitted, so their +4 is not as much as your +5 defense, and you will warp away, no problem. Now, a lot of PvPers, especially those that hunt miners, fit 3 warp disruption modules, so giving them a total of +6 warp disruption. So you will then have to activate one of your Aura warp core stabilizers to get away, because when activated, they give you an additional 2 warp core stabilization, bumping you up to 7, which again makes you safe. Now, when you're in panic, don't hit both at the same time. It doesn't help you, especially if it's only one attacker. There is one single exception to that, and that is if you're being attacked by a very specific faction cruiser, an Ashimu, which is one of the few ships in the game that has 4 mid slots and that technically can fit +8 warp disruption to their ship. But in most cases, activating one of these will be completely enough, and you can warp away without a problem. Now, the reason why you activate them one by one is because there's a good chance that if the PvP pilot is good and knows that your retriever is really slow, you will then have another problem at your next gate if you have to jump into the next system. Hopefully the next system to your station. And there you can then use your second Aura warp core stabilizer and then get away again. Now, a common mistake I've seen is that people activate those Aura warp core stabilizers too quickly. The opponent warps in, locks you, and you already press those buttons because you're just afraid. That's wrong. You have to accelerate first. You have to be just before warping. You have to get to your close to warping speed, where you start taking off, and there you have to activate your Aura warp core stabilizers. So rather activate them a little later than too early, because otherwise they already run out and you're stuck. Okay, so that's warp core stabilizers. This is our first aim, to always get away from any single attacker. As you can see, there's no room here for shield extenders, damage control, any of that nonsense, inertia stabilizers. None of this helps you, because if you don't have the warp core stabilization to get away, you will just die slower, but you will still die. And I've seen so many retrievers die already, and saw the kill males, and they just had the wrong fittings. So please, spend the money on those Aura warp core stabilizers. Yes, they're not cheap, but if you can afford a retriever, then also afford those Aura warp core stabilizers. Okay, second part of our tactic, of our aim to survive in any given situation. This is an MK5 cloaking device. You can also use lower tier or higher tier ones, MK3, MK5, MK7, doesn't really matter. But whenever there's more than one opponent in the system, you have to cloak. Because if there's more than one opponent and each of those opponents has warp disruption, then obviously your +9 with your 2 Aura warp core stabilizers is not going to be enough anymore. So then that's when you cloak. And I'll show this in action once we're out on the belt. Please make sure to not buy a Covert Ops cloaking device, because it will not fit on your retriever. It has to be a standard cloaking device. Okay, let's have a quick look at the rigs. Now, retrievers are tanky enough as they are already, so you don't really need any damage control or shield extender and so on. My retriever has 4047 shield points, so it's sort of like a shield tank, but it's pretty tanky overall when you look at all the numbers. And the one thing we now have to do is sort of plug the holes of the resistances in our shields. And we can do this with an anti-EM screen reinforcer, in this case tier 1, but you can also use a tier 2. You should probably use a tier 2. And then an anti-thermal screen reinforcer 1. So these give us 30% EM resistance and 30% thermal resistance, so that our resistance profile for the retriever is much more balanced, so that any single attacker is not going to apply too much damage to us with any single weapon type. And the last rig here is a core defense force field extender, and that gives us additional shield. I actually only have a prototype in here. It only gives me 12%. Now I believe a tier 1 gives you 15%, so that obviously makes much more sense. Okay, the last rigs are really for more mining efficiency, and there's 2 different types of rigs that you will have to look at. The one and the most popular one is the miner circulation accelerator, will give you 20% reduction of the mining cycle of your mining laser. So it will just extract ore more often. And the most efficient way to equip your retriever is with 3 of those. So all 3 rigs being the same miner circulation accelerator rig. Now, there's a close second, so if you actually do the calculations, if you put in 1 miner efficiency upgrade rig, that is almost as efficient, but not quite as efficient. I have it in here because that's what I just had laying around, and it really only is a very small difference in overall efficiency. Okay. That is our complete fitting. And again, this should give us maximum survivability of getting away whenever there's one attacker and cloaking when there's more than one attacker. It's like, it is often very tempting to mine in the same system as that station. The problem with that is, you can see here in my system right now there's 128 people. That means the list of people here that I have to monitor for anybody that's red or gray is very long. And that basically means that I cannot be certain to always know exactly when somebody red is coming in. And as I just explained with the fitting, we have to be aware when there is a red in system or multiple reds in system, because that's what our strategy to survive is based on. If we cannot see them coming, because also they might be cloaked, then the whole strategy falls apart and you just die. All right, so we will never mine in the system with the station there because we have not a good view of who's coming and going and whether there's any hostiles in system. That's number 1. Number 2, depending on whether you're in a corp or in an alliance, there's usually in-game chat channels and probably also in Discord that will tell you whether there's any hostiles in the system right now or in your region, and to warn people, hey, don't go out right now, miners, please dock, there's a hostile in system, people are being hunted, whatever it might be. So before you undock, before you leave the station right now with your retriever, make sure you check those sources of intelligence to find out, is there anybody out there that would try to instantly blow you up? And if all skies are clear, then you should be good to go. Let me actually check my channels here to make sure that I don't blow up my retriever on this video. That would actually be quite hilarious. I'm proud to say that I've never lost a retriever, knock on wood, and I've never lost a Venture 3 either. Alright. Seems all clear. Channels seem all good. Next, we have to leave the station to get out to the mining belt. And prior to one of the last updates, I would have always said, always press this undock button. Because only by pressing this undock button, you would be invulnerable outside of the station for a short while. Whereas if you were to start your autopilot straight from the station, you could have been shot down instantly when you leave the station. Now, this is not true anymore. Now, any way you leave the station, whether that's via autopilot or undock, you'll be invulnerable. However, I still prefer to just undock and then set my autopilot, because I'm setting my autopilot automatically straight to my station. So what we're going to do is simply undock and head out to the belt.